Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
I see Burnaby has had to work both sides of the border here when it comes to protesting the pipeline construction, where they've ordered the removal of the protesters and their camp from the site, but the city officially still is against the pipeline. Do you find it ironic?
Well, I think they finally had to stand up for the safety of the public. There's some critical infrastructure around the area where that Camp Cloud was based, the protester camp, that they had to ensure did not incur damage from a fire, just all kinds of possibilities, since they had the so-called sacred fire at the protest site. In such a dry season, where the reminder we have every day with this smog from forest fires, let's not have a massive fire on Burnaby Mountain. So it looks like Burnaby finally took the advice of the fire officials and dealt with the problem. But that's, of course, not the only problem that came from that camp. Defying Canadian justice is something that no one's allowed to do in this country. And finally, the people behind that camp were forced to comply with the law of the land, just like everybody else has to.
Do you think the protesters lost some power in the media when they started threatening reporters and camera people who were covering the story?
Yeah, never a good idea to attack the messenger. And you and I, we both spend a lot of time in the trenches as journalists. And, you know, you're just out there doing your job. If you're sent there with the camera to document something that's in public space, certainly not intruding into anyone's privacy, since they elected freely to build on public property. Well, they I think, had it coming when removal day finally arrived and the illegal structures were removed from that property.
The National Energy Board has approved most of the construction route now. Is that good news for the pipeline and for its supporters?
Yeah, I mean, these things are incremental. There's a lot of decision making behind the scenes, usually in these big, major industrial infrastructure projects. We don't really hear about those details. They just sort of happen quietly. But really, there's a vast amount of bureaucracy and permit getting that has to be gone through. And we just happen to be hearing more about the Kinder one because it's in the news. And so as each segment of the pipeline it goes through its approval, we're seeing those schedules kick in. I mean, for basically an $8 billion build out, the amount of chores and lists that they have to keep of all the to-dos there is just mind-boggling, and it all happens in sequence that must be preserved. It all has to be legally permitted and so on. Anyway, that's starting to unfold now, and I think we'll start to see the evidence of that as per the promise of the company to be actually shovels in the ground by this time of year.
With the federal government being the official owner of the pipeline now, who's in charge, and do they have specialized people, or are they subcontracting? What are they doing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to a great extent, the same people running the project before are running the project now. However, there is a new layer of oversight, which seems to be still a work in progress, that will go up to the proper people within the federal government. They will need to have a chain of accountability. Ultimately, I'm sure that goes to the Ministry of Finance, but there's going to be other ministers who have a say in it, and they'll have to make sure they're reporting out transparently on the use of public funds to get this project completed. So I think it's going to be a challenge for the Minister of Natural Resources, who's new in the job, Minister Sohi, to explain how that's being done, so everyone who needs to know or has an interest in it can understand it. But the project people who were doing all the on the ground work, the project management, I don't think there's any change in that. Those people have been on the job for years, building these schedules, doing all of the things you have to do for it, and it's just too critical. You can't change out those people. They're part of the project.
Does that Energy Board approval also mean that Aboriginal groups along the route are also behind it?
Well, yes, and they have been for some time, and I think it's taken a long time for that to get out, that even though there are some First Nations who, let's acknowledge, are not in favor of the project, and some individuals inside different First Nations who aren't in favor of the project, just like any other group in Canadian society, not everyone is for or against any particular thing. First Nations are no different. But when it comes to, if you count it up, all the First Nations are more in favor than against. Well, yes, definitely that's the case. There's something like 40 First Nations that have become engaged in the project through different sorts of agreements. And I recently interviewed a chief from the Whispering Pines First Nation up north of Kamloops. They are among those who sit on the pipeline route itself. You know, some of the opposing First Nations aren't even on the pipeline route. This particular one is. They see benefit long term from having the ability to tax that infrastructure so that benefits can be delivered to their people. They don't have enough revenue. You know, First Nations have a tough go of it. Sometimes they're criticized for getting things handed to them on a plate. But when you actually talk to First Nations leaders, as I do a lot, you discover that they don't have the resources to be able to provide the basic services that, you know, most Canadians take for granted. So this is just seen as a business opportunity that lets them advance the quality of life for their people. It's that simple. And most of those First Nations are in favor of this project.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and planned for Canada this summer. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol ASDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol CYP, the Pink's CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the Conservative Party of Canada is about to hold its policy convention in Halifax. What do you think they should be concentrating on if we want to have continued resource development in a responsible way?
Yeah, well, trade is really important, being able to flow liquids from one province to another. Bear in mind, this is a really important one. It's not just another Conservative Party convention. They happen, you know, regularly. This one is before a federal election happening by October 2019. So everyone's watching. Lately, we've seen Maxime Bernier, who was a contender for the leadership of the party, come into the fray with commentary on immigration that was regarded as quite sensational by the media in Canada. A lot of people are talking about it. I think it builds interest in what's going to happen, whether you agree with Mr. Bernier's comments or you don't agree with them. They've certainly shown a spotlight on this gathering in Halifax. But I think, to your point, the idea that we have to be able to get our energy to market to get the benefits of our resources, that's very high on the list for the Conservatives. There's a proposal that they support the development of the Energy East pipeline. That's the one that was withdrawn amid controversy. And they're saying it's a means of creating Canadian jobs and reducing our dependence on foreign oil. Now, they're also talking about tidal energy, so it's not just about hydrocarbons and fossil fuels. The Conservatives in 2018 seem to have an expansive view of what adding energy to the mix means, and they also are interested in interprovincial trade barriers, reducing those. Now, of course, we want that on wine and beer and other things like that, but it's also important for how we trade in energy.
And also jobs. People from certain provinces aren't allowed to work in the province next door.
Well, yes, and I think harmonizing these things is very, very important. You know, we've got so many things right now in terms of federal policy that are seemingly not putting us on a trajectory to build jobs, whether they're jobs from one province to another or contained in a province. And one of the things that conservatives say they're going to be talking about, in fact, the very first resolution in their policy book on environment is principles around balancing climate change and the economy. They believe that an effective international emissions reduction regime for climate change must be really global, and it must include binding targets for all the world's major emitters, including China and the USA. And that's a policy to be debated. That's not their policy yet, but it draws into contrast the idea that Canada is kind of the Boy Scout on climate change. We're the ones who are hobbling our economy, or you might say, pointing our economy towards a clean energy future. Both statements are true, because other countries in the world, much bigger emitters and much bigger energy producers than Canada, are ignoring all the things that we are following. We're so nice, so trusting in Canada. And meanwhile, China, the USA, they don't care. Saudi Arabia, do you think they're doing anything for the environment? No, they're not. They're not doing carbon taxes. You can buy a gallon of gas in Saudi Arabia for 25 cents. They have no concept of carbon taxes. Whereas in Canada, we're just, bending over backwards and making business really extra expensive by doing these things. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do that at all. Of course, we should be addressing these issues. But if we don't do it in a way that's balanced and reflects a global commitment, then how can a little country like Canada change the world?
Is Canada one of the few petrol-producing nations that doesn't give its own citizens a break when it comes to petrol products?
I think that's probably true. If you look at the USA, the cost of a gasoline is, we all know what that is. They're a major exporter of oil and gas nowadays, and getting bigger and bigger. They're actually eating our lunch. No, not just our lunch, our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, in terms of getting their products to market, even though they are letting people drive around for half the cost in their cars here than Canada. And other countries, as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia, they definitely ensure that their citizens have got access to very affordable energy, too affordable in my opinion, but nevertheless, that's what they're doing. And countries that aren't producing oil and gas in Europe, well, we also know what the high cost of fueling a vehicle is over there. It's double what ours is in Canada. So, being in the luxury position of being an energy producer like Canada is, being an exporter in control of our future, that's an incredibly valuable thing that every other country in the world that doesn't have that is very desirous of having. They wish they had what Canada has. And so I think it's really important for us to make good decisions for Canadians and make sure we're putting our economy first, so jobs can be first and families can then be first.
I may be wrong. It may be a different country, but I believe Denmark has used their petrol reserves to put aside money for their pension fund that amounts to more than $1 million per person set aside for the future.
Yes, and you're talking about Norway and their sovereign wealth fund, which is $1 trillion, give or take. It's probably more than that today, given that the S&P is at an all-time high. American economy is raging, and probably taking the sovereign wealth fund of Norway up with it. They have, they approach their fiscal planning a little differently. I think the comparisons often it's why can't we be as good as Norway in managing our resource revenues? I think it's a little misguided to make that comparison because we do things very differently, and Canada gets lots of benefits from resources too. It's just that Norway does it in a different way. Nevertheless, you can't argue that having $1 trillion in the bank for a tiny country like Norway with, I think it's 5 million people, puts them in a very nice position with, as you say, if it's $1 million in the bank per citizen, that's something that gives them freedom to invest in people. One thing they're doing in Norway is building a transportation network, roads that allow you to go up the coast. They've brought in visionary architects to build these dazzling bridges and roads to remote areas of Norway that are part of developing the country and allowing people to move freely. We don't have that in many parts of Canada. Our road infrastructure system is challenging because, of course, we're such a big country, not many people in it. But Norway, they've chosen to make investments like that. We could do that in British Columbia. Right now, we're very constrained because of the ferry system. We don't have roads connecting islands or bridges connecting islands. Imagine if we had $1 trillion. We could do that. We could get there if we chose to invest into some sort of sovereign wealth fund over time. I think that's worth talking about.
Well, Pat McGeer said they could have built a bridge to Vancouver Island for $1 billion. I'm sure it's a lot more now. And any engineer who says they can't, one of the engineers who built the island, the bridge up between Sweden and one of the countries there said, you think you have challenging conditions. They have icebergs and so on. You don't have that challenge between Vancouver and Vancouver Island. They said it would be very easy to build that bridge, and it would save islanders a lot of transportation costs. On the other hand, they like being isolated.
Yes, we could do it on the south. I've always thought as well that a northern link would be good too, because the future of coastal BC, in my opinion, is in places like the Campbell River area, the Comox Valley. That's where a lot of people want to go and live. It's wonderful up there. Victoria's kind of built out at this point in time and getting a bit crowded, but you look at that mid and northern island, it's such a place of opportunity. It's where, in the earliest days, if it's true that Drake came and visited here in the Elizabethan era, and there's a theory that he did, it's believed that he went to Campbell River, a place he called Albion, and thought that was a very good place to live. And later, in the early 20th century, the British thought that if the British Navy ever got thrown out of Hong Kong by the Japanese, what they should do is take the Hong Kong military presence that the Brits had and put it up in Port McNeill, of all places, because it had the perfect attributes for a British Imperial Naval Center. It's a great little piece of history that I stumbled upon in some recently released secret archives in the National Archives in Ottawa a couple of years ago. Fascinating story. But the North Island has always been a place of the future, and it still is.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE symbol CRL and the pink symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, you're a man who travels around the planet looking at where people are developing natural resources and doing it in a sustainable way. What is your next trip, and what do you plan to find out?
Well, I'm going to be going through Montana to look at some mining towns, and I've been through before. I think it's just something you can do at this time of year. That's one place. I've also been up to the North Island. Speaking of the North Island, Vancouver Island, what's going on up there in salmon farming is absolutely amazing. I was looking recently at some salmon hatcheries that are doing incredible work, and I think it's really important to see the linkage between what citizens are doing through these volunteer efforts to get salmon back into the rivers with the sockeye returns. We've had very, very high returns on the sockeye to the Fraser River. A lot of people have been out there fishing. Epic numbers of people have made their way to the shores of the Fraser River up in the Fraser Valley with fishing rods in their hands these last few days, and they're pulling in some beautiful fish. So that tells us that even though in these times we hear about climate change, we hear about pollution in the ocean, we hear about overfishing, we hear about all these things, the fish are still strong and come back in these high return years. And it's interesting to note that there are kind of the doom and gloom crowd who are always attacking one of our best, greenest industries, which is salmon farming, and saying, oh, that's hurting the salmon. Well, it doesn't look like it's hurting the salmon if we have the millions returning this year. And that's what the scientists tell you as well. I was recently in Nanaimo. I met with the Dean of Science at Vancouver Island University to ask about the knowledge we have of aquaculture and salmon farming, to see whether people can be confident that salmon farming is as good as the industry of salmon farming says it is. And my information from that is that over the whole period of salmon farming in British Columbia, there has never been a population level impact on wild salmon from salmon farming. You know, years back, and everyone knows this, they talk about it in the industry, the salmon farming industry wasn't really up to snuff. It wasn't fully developed. It didn't have the international expertise in, a lot has changed. And now we have world leading practices. We have, veterinarians who are at these farms all the time. We have, all kinds of work to ensure fish health constantly. And as a result of that, we have this beautiful industry that could be so much more if we can make choices. And so I think it would be great to see the industry turn the corner and get back into the growth mode of BC, because we sure need the jobs. You know, I was in some of those Vancouver Island towns, and you see these shuttered storefronts and shopping malls with no customers, and it kind of, you know, is heartbreaking for the local business owners and municipalities that need to have a tax base to pave their streets and keep their water and sewage running, you know, not to have businesses. And it all starts with having industry.
Is it possible to raise wild salmon in a pen as babies, release them out into the ocean, and then have them return to those same pens 4 years later?
Well, that's what you call salmon ranching. They practice it in Alaska. They've identified this, particularly with pinks and chum. They've been doing this on a massive scale, and you know how it works with salmon. When they are born, they're imprinted biologically on the place where they came. There's a certain smell marker that is unmistakable for that little fish. It swims out to sea, and if it's one of the lucky ones, the tiny percentage of lucky ones that comes back 4 years later or 5 years later, as the case may be, or 3 years later, it knows where it's going because it can smell its home river, and it goes there. Now, what they do in salmon ranching is they imprint the salmon to a bay or another place, not upstream. And those fish will go to sea. They'll get nice and fat eating in the wild for those years. Then they'll come back to the bay where they were imprinted. And those fishermen will be waiting with open nets to welcome them home and catch them. And that's how that industry works. And it's really interesting. We're not really doing that in BC on a massive scale. There's some hatcheries that do, you know, kind of that, but not quite the same thing. It's more based on the river systems and bringing them back to the rivers, and they can be caught. They can be caught on the way in.
Stewart, anything else you wanted to raise with us today?
Well, I think everyone is noticing the wildfires, and of course is asking, what does this mean? Bear in mind, there's been wildfires in BC before, over the decades, over the centuries. It's a natural occurrence. There are those who say part of the cause is that we haven't had the kind of active forest management that would allow for controlled burns over the years, and as a result, there's been a buildup in fuel. There's foresters who are concerned about the presence of infrastructure, and not just foresters who are concerned, but people in charge of transmission lines and the power system, worried that we've got all of this infrastructure out in forests that are quite dry, where they could be endangered. We've got people in communities who are worried about their homes. We've got people looking at wildfires and saying, well, is this a sign of climate change? Definitely an element of that as forests are dealing with dry conditions right now. So when you have smoke in front of you, you can't see things that you're used to seeing, as is the case right now in the last few days. It brings all those thoughts to mind. So there's lots of resources for finding out more information. I don't think there's any one simple answer to what the future holds in that, but clearly it's something that we're going to see as a major preoccupation for the province of British Columbia, which is responsible for fighting those fires.
Some have suggested every city and town in Vancouver should have a flock of sheep or goats to eat the underbrush to reduce the chance of an interface fire.
Yes, well, I think that's a good idea. What do you say we get started on that?
Well, and at least we'd get some wool out of it. Some nice BC wool.
Well, usually we're doing a little wool gathering on your show, so why not just extend that to the rest of the time?
Stewart, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. His Twitter handle at SJMuir. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests like Stewart can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.